To express gratitude to God in the name of the people for the preservation of the United States is my first duty in addressing you. Our thoughts next revert to the death of the late President by an act of parricidal treason. The grief of the nation is still fresh. It finds some solace in the consideration that he lived to enjoy the highest proof of confidence by entering on the renewed term of the chief magistracy to which he had been elected, that he brought the Civil War substantially to a close, that his loss was deplored in all parts of the Union, and that foreign nations have rendered justice to his memory. His removal cast upon me a heavier weight of cares than ever devolved upon any one of his predecessors. To fulfill my trust, I need the support and confidence of all who are associated with me in the various departments of government, and the support and confidence of the people. There is but one way in which I can hope to gain their necessary aid. It is to state with frankness the principles which guide my conduct, and their application to the present state of affairs, well aware that the efficiency of my labors will in a great measure depend on your and their undivided approbation. The Union of the United States of America was intended by its authors to last as long as the states themselves shall last. The Union shall be perpetual, are the words of the Confederation. To form a more perfect union by an ordinance of the people of the United States is the declared purpose of the Constitution. The hand of divine providence was never more plainly visible in the affairs of men than in the framing and the adoption of that instrument. It is beyond comparison the greatest event in American history. And indeed, is it not of all events in modern times the most pregnant with consequences for every people of the earth? The members of the convention which prepared it brought to their work the experience of the Confederation, of their several states, and of other republican governments, old and new. But they needed, and they obtained, a wisdom superior to experience. And when for its validity it required the approval of a people that occupied a large part of a continent and acted separately in many distinct conventions, what is more wonderful than that, after earnest contention and long discussion, all feelings and all opinions were ultimately drawn in one way to its support? The Constitution, to which life has thus imparted, contains within itself ample resources for its own preservation. It has power to enforce the laws, punish treason, and ensure domestic tranquility. In case of the usurpation of the government of a state by one man or an oligarchy, it becomes a duty of the United States to make good the guarantee to that state of a republican form of government, and so to maintain the homogeneousness of all. Does the lapse of time reveal defects? A simple mode of amendment is provided in the Constitution itself, so that its conditions can always be made to conform to the requirements of advancing civilization. No room is allowed even for the thought of a possibility of its coming to an end. And these powers of self-preservation have always been asserted in their complete integrity by every patriotic chief magistrate, by Jefferson and Jackson not less than by Washington and Madison. The parting advice of the father of his country, while yet president, to the people of the United States was that the free Constitution, which was the work of their hands, might be sacredly maintained, and the inaugural words of President Jefferson held up the preservation of the general government in its whole constitutional vigor as the sheet anchor of our peace at home and safety abroad. The Constitution is the work of the people of the United States, and it should be as indestructible as the people. It is not strange that the framers of the Constitution, which had no model in the past, should not have fully comprehended the excellence of their own work. Fresh from a struggle against arbitrary power, many patriots suffered from harassing fears of an absorption of the state governments by the general government, and many from a dread that the states would break away from their orbits. But the very greatness of our country should allay the apprehension of encroachments by the general government. The subjects that come unquestionably within its jurisdiction are so numerous that it must ever naturally refuse to be embarrassed by questions that lie beyond it. Were it otherwise, the executive would sink beneath the burden. The channels of justice would be choked. Legislation would be obstructed by excess, so that there is a greater temptation to exercise some of the functions of the general government through the states than to trespass on their rightful sphere. The absolute acquiescence in the decisions of the majority was at the beginning of the century enforced by Jefferson as the vital principle of republics, and the events of the last 4 years have established, we will hope forever, that there lies no appeal to force. The maintenance of the Union brings with it the support of the state governments in all their rights, but it is not one of the rights of any state government to renounce its own place in the Union or to nullify the laws of the Union. The largest liberty is to be maintained in the discussion of the acts of the federal government, but there is no appeal from its laws except to the various branches of that government itself, or to the people, who grant to the members of the legislative and of the executive departments no tenure but a limited one, and in that manner always retain the powers of redress. The sovereignty of the states is the language of the Confederacy, and not the language of the Constitution. The latter contains the emphatic words, "This Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby, anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary, notwithstanding." Certainly the government of the United States is a limited government, and so is every state government a limited government. With us, this idea of limitation spreads through every form of administration, general, state, and municipal, and rests on the great distinguishing principle of the recognition of the rights of man. The ancient republics absorbed the individual in the state, prescribed in his religion and controlled his activity. The American system rests on the assertion of the equal right of every man to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, to freedom of conscience, to the culture and exercise of all his faculties. As a consequence, the state government is limited, as to the general government in the interests of the Union, as to the individual citizen in the interest of freedom. States with proper limitations of power are essential to the existence of the Constitution of the United States. At the very commencement, and we assumed a place among the powers of the earth, the Declaration of Independence was adopted by states. So also were the Articles of Confederation, and when the people of the United States ordained and established the Constitution, it was the assent of the states, one by one, which gave it vitality. In the event, too, of any amendment to the Constitution, the proposition of Congress needs the confirmation of states. Without states, one great bunch of the legislative government would be wanting. And if we look beyond the letter of the Constitution to the character of our country, its capacity for comprehending within its jurisdiction a vast continental empire is due to the system of states. The best security for the perpetual existence of the states is the supreme authority of the Constitution of the United States. The perpetuity of the Constitution brings with it the perpetuity of the states. Their mutual relation makes us what we are, and in our political system their connection is indissoluble. The whole cannot exist without the parts, nor the parts without the whole. So long as the Constitution of the United States endures, the states will endure. The destruction of the one is the destruction of the other. The preservation of the one is the preservation of the other. I have thus explained my views of the mutual relations of the Constitution and the states, because they unfold the principles on which I have sought to solve the momentous questions and overcome the appalling difficulties that met me at the very commencement of my administration. It has been my steadfast object to escape from the sway of momentary passions and to derive a healing policy from the fundamental and unchanging principles of the Constitution. I found the states suffering from the effects of civil war. Resistance to the general government appeared to have exhausted itself. The United States had recovered possession of their forts and arsenals, and their armies were in the occupation of every state which had attempted to secede. Whether the territory within the limits of those states should be held as conquered territory under military authority emanating from the President as the head of the army was the first question that presented itself for decision. Now, military governments established for an indefinite period would have offered no security for the early suppression of discontent, would have divided the people into the vanquishers and the vanquished, and would have envenomed hatred rather than have restored affection. Once established, no precise limit to their continuance was conceivable. They would have occasioned an incalculable, exhausting expense. Peaceful emigration to and from that portion of the country is one of the best means that can be thought of for the restoration of harmony, and that emigration would have been prevented. For what emigrant from abroad, what industrious citizen at home, would place himself willingly under military rule? The chief persons who would have followed in the train of the army would have been dependents on the general government, or men who expected profit from the miseries of their erring fellow citizens. The powers of patronage and rule which would have been exercised under the president over a vast and populous and naturally wealthy region are greater than, unless under extreme necessity, I should be willing to entrust to any one man. They are such as, for myself, I could never, unless on occasions of great emergency, consent to exercise. The willful use of such powers, if continued through a period of years, would have endangered the purity of the general administration and the liberties of the states, which remained loyal. Besides, the policy of military rule over a conquered territory would have implied that the states whose inhabitants may have taken part in the rebellion had by the act of those inhabitants ceased to exist. But the true theory is that all pretended acts of secession were from the beginning null and void. The states cannot commit treason nor screen the individual citizens who may have committed treason any more than they can make valid treaties or engage in lawful commerce with any foreign power. The states attempting to secede placed themselves in a condition where their vitality was impaired, but not extinguished, their functions suspended but not destroyed. But if any state neglects or refuses to perform its offices, there is the more need that the general government should maintain all its authority and, as soon as practicable, resume the exercise of all its functions. On this principle I have acted, and have gradually and quietly, and by almost imperceptible steps, sought to restore the rightful energy of the general government and of the states. To that end, provisional governors have been appointed for the states, conventions called, governors elected, legislatures assembled, and senators and representatives chosen to the Congress of the United States. At the same time, the courts of the United States, as far as could be done, have been reopened, so that the laws of the United States may be enforced through their agency. The blockade has been removed and the custom houses re-established in ports of entry, so that the revenue of the United States may be collected. The Post Office Department renews its ceaseless activity, and the general government is thereby enabled to communicate promptly with its officers and agents. The courts bring security to persons and property. The opening of the ports invites the restoration of industry and commerce. The post office renews the facilities of social intercourse and of business. And is it not happy for us all that the restoration of each one of these functions of the general government brings with it a blessing to the states over which they are extended? Is it not a sure promise of harmony and renewed attachment to the Union that after all that has happened, the return of the general government is known only as a beneficence? I know very well that this policy is attended with some risk, that for its success it requires at least the acquiescence of the states which it concerns, that it implies an invitation to those states, by renewing their allegiance to the United States, to resume their functions as states of the Union. But it is a risk that must be taken. In the choice of difficulties, it is the smallest risk, and to diminish, and if possible to remove all danger, I have felt it incumbent on me to assert one other power of the general government, the power of pardon. As no state can throw a defense over the crime of treason, the power of pardon is exclusively vested in the executive government of the United States. In exercising that power, I have taken every precaution to connect it with the clearest recognition of the binding force of the laws of the United States, and at unqualified acknowledgment of the great social change of condition in regard to slavery which has grown out of the war.